It's fantastic to be here. My old stomping grounds. I lived at Spruce and 10th way back when, as one of my colleagues says, when the dinosaurs were on Earth. It was a while ago. But I have a soft spot for Philadelphia, and I try to visit often. I know you have a lot of stuff going on here. It's really cool to see. Unfortunately, I chose to not talk about the marginalia of our practice, of which there is quite a bit still. We pride ourselves on that. But rather to shift focus to a little more sober topic, which our practice deals with very much, and it's about civic space and the democratizing of civic space. Now, I say the word democratizing, and I know you can tear me apart, you can ask me questions about it, we can have a conversation about it, but it's a sort of general term for a very specific act of taking private projects often and trying to give them back to the citizens of the places in which they're made. I'll explain what that means as we go through each of these projects. But anyway, that's sort of the outline. They tell you to do that at the beginning of a paper, so people sort of know what they're getting into. But just a little stuff from Liz and Rick's history. They founded the firm, as Winka mentioned, in '79, and the practices had always been about, in a way, theater. And theater encompasses many forms. It can take place in the theater. It can also take place in some drinking glasses called Vice Virtue that we did, and they're water glasses. But for every thought you have which is pure and good for you, like water, there is an alternate side of the coin. And so we made these glasses be about Prozac and heroin and bourbon, and in addition to water. And we've also done projects that are for purchase. You can buy this lamp called Light Sock. It's a Swarovski light fixture, and it's customizable depending on how much you want to spend. You can buy these particular crystals, which is Swarovski's most popular crystal shape, pear shape. And you can buy the light in one lobe or two lobes. This is the two lobe, obviously, my preferred version. And then in the theater itself, Liz and Rick have worked with many notable European companies, mostly ballet, but also drama theater companies. But one of the things that they were interested in was interrogating space. They always operated as architects, even though they were operating outside the traditional domain of architects and architecture. And the theater is one of the places that they interrogated. And in one of the pieces we did with the Chateau Dance, made a 45-foot long by 20-foot high seamless mylar mirror, which floats at a 45-degree angle above the space and essentially redoubles the action of the theater and turns what is a perspectival performance into a kind of planar performance, a two-dimensional performance that happens simultaneously. So sort of taking the vision that you see and you trust and actually making a new kind of vision which you're not sure about. We've explored issues of visuality and the culture of visuality quite a bit in our practice. You'll see that as a recurring theme coming up, and we carry that into our architecture projects as well. This is another view, so you get a top-down plan view of the action as well as your perspective view. So it's a sort of time-space elision. We've also been involved in many interpretive museum shows where we've acted as both designer and curator. One of our better-known ones was called How Wine Became Modern at the San Francisco MoMA that we did about 5 years ago. And in this show, what we endeavored to do with Henry Urbach, the then chief curator of architecture at SF MoMA, was to kind of chronicle the moment where the culture of wine went from being a kind of European-based, snobby affair to breaking out into the New World. And that happened with the Tasting of Paris in 1976. And this is a re-depiction of that moment. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the image of the actual tasting that took place, but it literally was judges from around the world sitting on one side of the table, like the Last Supper, really, swear to God, and blind taste test with French wines and wines from around the world. California wines won every category, and the French critics were like, "This can't be happening. What is the problem?" Anyway, and so what happened actually was wine shifted its focus to the New World, which is everything in the Southern Hemisphere and California, and wine started to become a design problem. This is another show that we did at the Museum of Art and Design about 3 years ago, called The Art of Smell. And in this show, I think I've just got this one slide, but this sort of says it all. There was no text at all. There were no objects, although this was a show dedicated to 12 seminal perfumes throughout the history of perfume making. And so what we chose to do was, in fact, only have depressions in the wall. And you can see, I think that's my partner Liz, bending over and sniffing one of the depressions. And when you move your head into the depression, it would sense, there was a proximity sensor, and it would eject a little puff of the perfume in question into your nose, right into it. It's actually rather rude. And I have some close-up pictures, but I didn't show them. And there's no wall text. The text comes and goes through projection. And so, you know, in these museum shows, we're trying to, you know, kind of dive deeper into not only the specific task at hand, but also in different layers. And speaking of which, this is the Charles James show that we designed for the Met Museum for their annual fashion show. This was not last year's, but the year before. And Charles James is a little-known couturier, one of America's first, actually, considered a couturier even by Parisian standards. However, he was self-taught, and he made these dresses that resembled sort of 19th century affairs with these constructed bustles. But every dress took the woman's body and took it into a different place. It was very hard to understand how he managed to do this. He was untrained. And we didn't know how we would do a show like this, and so when we started looking at the clothes more closely, we discovered that they were constructed like architectural models, with sticks that would be like glued and stapled together. You know, you've just been doing it up in your studios, and like the whole three-dimensional structure made like a structure for a building. And so we went in and deconstructed all of these dresses with video, and you can move the camera around a remote control arm and hone in on a part of the dress and see how it's actually constructed in 3 dimensions on the screen. This is sort of a sampler, a Whitman sampler start to the talk, but just to help you understand sort of where we're coming from. And so I would call this method of approaching a problem supervision, where we try to give people who are visitors to these exhibitions and to our buildings the power to see deeper and more precisely. When Winka was listing the buildings that were underway, a lot of those were completed in the past year, including the Berkeley Museum of Art and the Pacific Film Archive, which is an adaptive reuse project that we're very proud of. Unfortunately, it opened 2 days before the Broad opened, so it was completely consumed by news of the Broad, which I will talk about in more detail in a second. However, it's really quite a lovely project in that it took over the old Berkeley, University of Berkeley printing press, where they printed the UN Charter. So it's truly a historic building, and also a wonderful warehouse building with 3 north-facing skylights and an old end grain wood floor that lent itself perfectly to art exhibition. exactly the kind of space that we've loved to re-inhabit for art. And then we slumped over the top of this a new building, a sort of cipher of a building that houses the Theater of the Pacific Film Archives. And in fact, this thing slumps into a hole that we dug that has the library and education facilities of the building. And all of this is available through glass and sneaky views in the sidewalk that let you see down into the floors below or see into the gallery spaces. You can literally see into almost every gallery walking by on the sidewalk. And sort of this leads into a lot of what the theme of tonight, which is, has to do with civicness and having work out in the public sphere that contributes to our civic life and understanding of culture that you can get for free, basically, is what it is in a nutshell. I'm going to go back in time, and some of you may have seen these projects and perhaps even my delivery of them before, but it's important to understand how we finally kind of bridged between the world of, let's say, fine art, which Liz and Rick had mostly been doing before I arrived in 1997, into a world that sort of straddles the world of architecture with its program-driven and functional aspects, and the world of art with its pure delight and sort of nonsensicalness. Although I guess artists would not necessarily agree with that. However, we love the idea of making pieces which are provocative and sort of not understandable. And one of the first pieces that we did that really did have a foot in both camps was the Blur building that we designed for the Swiss Expo 2002. This was a competition in which we were invited to join a team to do a media pavilion. And because we had been doing a lot of media work, you can see from the previous work I showed of Liz and Rick's, they had become known as people who use technology and media in sort of semi-permanent and permanent ways in the built environment. And I guess because we were expected to do a media pavilion, which suggests high technology, pixels per inch, the better pixels per inch, the better, the more pixels per inch, the better. And we chose to do something precisely different than that, although it does in fact mediate the site. And what we did is designed a cloud that you could inhabit. And the cloud was made of 33,000 high pressure fog nozzles attached to a tensegrity structure the size of a football field, hovering over Lake Neuchâtel on 4 columns only. And the high-pressure fog nozzles are really simple, off-the-shelf nozzles you could find at any supermarket spritzing lettuce, but just amassed in such a vast quantity that together they did something like this. And it's a building that we like to say is kind of formless, shapeless, tasteless, massless, edgeless piece of architecture. But in fact, it is a piece of architecture. You can inhabit it. You could go up into it, don a raincoat, and go inside the fog. This is what it looked like at night. This is an aside. It was only intended to stay up for 6 months, which in fact it did stay up for 6 months, but it did cause quite a stir in Switzerland. People wanted to keep it in the end. And they asked us if we would be willing to let it be turned into the UFO museum. And I just say that with this picture up because you can understand why. Here's what it felt like going up. You did not know what you were going into, but essentially the building is a building made of the site. And this is also a recurring theme of ours. It's literally the lake water that's been picked up and repositioned, reformatted, and turned into an occupiable mass. And this is what it looked like when the fog was turned on, and then the left-hand window is what it was like when you went into the cloud. Basically, there was nothing to see and nothing to do. And so in robbing vision from all visitors, it sort of foregrounded the role that vision plays in our contemporary culture. Keep in mind, this was really before cell phone technology had cameras, and there were no smartphones yet, and it sort of predated our obsession with the image. And so there's our kind of photoshopped photo of what it felt like. We had designed a show to go in there which used geo positioning very early before it became, you know, what drives most of our apps these days. It was a sort of an affinity game where you could find the person who is most closely matched to you. Anyway, it was a very popular exhibit, and it even made it onto a chocolate bar, which and in Switzerland, that says a lot. So that's sort of the hinge project that leads into all the other projects that you're going to see now, starting with the Institute of Contemporary Art, which we won prior to the Blur building being constructed. The Institute of Contemporary Art had an interesting problem. It was one of the first new museums to be built in the 21st century. And so we asked the question, what does a museum have to do in the 21st century? Does it want to be a kind of icon like Bilbao was? It's only been built 4 years before. Or a background building like the Goers collection by Herzog Demeron. And we decided that was a false duality, and that in fact a museum has to do sort of those two things and more. And so this site, which we were given in a new development on Boston Harbor, overlooking the harbor, was a blessing and a curse. The site was far too small to actually put the museum that the ICA wanted to put there, and also it was cursed by this kind of stunning view of, you know, where the Boston Tea Party took place. You know, this beautiful harbor view, historic America, and a museum which is really about contemplation and looking. To a place like that, a view is distracting. And so what we wanted to do was to make this building be about looking. And so the building itself became a kind of a mediator of the view of the site. And in several places it does things like blur, frame the site, a couple of other acts. It's also built of the material of the site. So starting with the Harbor Walk, a public boardwalk which is mandated by the city of Boston to go around the entire harbor. We started the project by extending that boardwalk up to make the first 3 levels of the museum, and then we dropped down the gallery floor on top so that it could harness the light of the sun. And so the building is literally made of the city of Boston, the material of Boston. We also threaded the harbor walk right through the lobby, and asked that the ICA dedicate a gallery free of charge to the ground floor. So there's a place that you can go and see art that's been specifically commissioned for the ICA, whether you buy a ticket or not. And this is what the building looks like. It's been up for over 10 years now, and they're looking to expand it. In fact, they just announced they were going to take a new site across the harbor and put a ferry connector, which is what we had originally proposed in our proposal, and they almost laughed us out of the room. But there they are doing it now after 10 years of continued growth since the opening of the museum. And so one of the things we did to make the site large enough to accommodate all of the fledgling collection, but really the Kunsthal, it really operates more like a Kunsthal like your ICA here, is that we got the city of Boston to agree to let us build all the way to the water's edge, which the zoning, which had only been enacted the past year, said that all new buildings had to be held back 25 feet from the water's edge. So we basically were the first civic building to be made under the new zoning, and we were the first project to refute the new zoning. But we were able to do it by saying to Boston, we're going to give you back a civic space, and what you see here is the Harbor Walk Plaza. And even though it's on private land, we'll donate it back to the city of Boston, and it will be essentially a room for the city covered by the museum. And it has become one of Boston's favorite gathering places in the warmer months. And I've been there in the winter, even though it's north-facing, people still hanging out on the steps, which is very fun to see. That Harbor Walk material rolls into a theater that seats 300 people. It's a multi-purpose theater. And this is the first room that uses the view in a particular way. you can change out the view with solar shades that let you see through, but dampen the view a little bit, and of course you can black out this room. And then the elevator in the very heart of the building is large enough to fit a car in, or to fit an entire class of school children who really love riding this elevator, even though there's a children's museum 3 blocks away. They seem to prefer this. And this elevator literally scans the building from the inside out and frames different views of the harbor as it goes up through a crossover bridge from the theater and the back of house of the theater, and then all the way up to the top floor where the galleries are, to kind of modulate the view of the harbor. The galleries are very simple and can be reconfigured very easily, all naturally lit, although they can make them dark. They have drop-down shades. And then finally, there are 2 major galleries, and there's one little skinny gallery, which is at the tip of the cantilever. And that is really the only place that you get that kind of unobstructed view of the harbor. And we like to call it this sort of the pornographic view, the view that you usually get when you buy your multi-million-dollar apartment on the water. So you have to get through the museum before you're rewarded the view. However, we did make a space called the Mediatek, which again tries to take the site in, literally to collect the site and turn it into part of the holding of the museum. The space is angled down, and it has an angled sheet of glass, and the horizon is such that it cuts out everything but the view of the water, and so it literally brings the site in as a kind of object. The first day we were there, Rick, my partner, and I were standing in the room, and someone came in and said that was the largest TV they'd ever seen, and we were so excited by that comment. We do work on quite a few public buildings, museums, performing arts centers, and a lot of academic buildings more and more, and we love working in academia. Probably our best known museum project to date is the Broad, which opened a year and a half ago in Los Angeles, occupying a really scary position in downtown Los Angeles on Grand Avenue, right next door to Frank Gehry's quite beautiful, actually, and very successful Disney Hall building. This is my favorite Frank Gehry building. But that building sort of demands a lot of attention, and it was very hard to think about how to operate next to that, to be a good neighbor, but to also stand out. And we had a zoning envelope which prevented us from going higher than 75 feet, and our site was only 200 feet long. And so what we decided to do was sort of team up with the Gehry and sort of do an opposite game. Instead of shiny, smooth, and reflective, we did a building that was matte, porous, and absorptive. And it's all about light, bringing light in and bringing light to a gallery floor. Programmatically, the Broad is an interesting problem. It's something that's happening in the museum world more and more. And that is that the collection that is not on display has to be stored somewhere. And Eli wanted to store all of the collection in the building where it's displayed, which is unusual. And we thought that was a fantastic opportunity to actually set those 2 aspects of the building apart, the display of the art and the storage of the art. So the storage of the art is in that dark object that sits in the middle, almost like a kind of a seed or a pit in a fruit. And then the skin, the veil that covers that, would hover gently 20 feet above the top of the vault, that we call it, where the art was stored, and that would be the main floor, the main museum floor. And to arrive at the main museum floor, you would actually penetrate through the collection, and then on the descent, you'll see how that works. There's a stair through the collection that gives you glimpses into the storage. This is the Broad. The veil is made of thousands of precast sections of concrete, and they were actually done right in California, just a few miles away from the site. And we wanted to make sure that the lobby, which is free of, the museum is free of charge, which was an innovation that came from the Bro, but has been super successful. But it's also desk-free, which is really interesting. There is not an information desk. There's not a membership desk. There's not a ticket desk. You walk in and you're greeted by a person, and that person, says, "Go up the escalator to the art." And it's changed the demographic of the museum goers in Los Angeles. It's really, really interesting. They just did a survey about 3 months ago upon the 1-year anniversary of people who go there, and it's some percentage, younger than the average museum goer. For sure, they have less money, and it's also much more diverse with lots of Latinos and African American visitors. And so it's sort of, they hit this really great note of being free, but also requiring that you check in on an app. So it sort of cross-referenced what kids today, probably some of you, how you exist, sort of, like on apps all the time. Anyway, so once you enter, there's no buffer, there's no barrier, there's no kind of intimidating desk. The escalator is one way, and there's only one of them, and it takes you up to the light-filled exhibition floor, which looks like this. You'll note that the cells that form the ceiling are also the cells that form the walls around the gallery, and they're all aimed in the same direction. So it's as if you took a kind of sponge and you just scooped out the inside. They're aimed in such a way that no direct light falls into the museum, either from the walls or the ceiling. And you can erect partitions. This is from the opening show. They don't touch the ceiling, so you still get a sense of the continued field of light. And then the way down is theatricized with this glass round elevator, or actually what's more interesting, the stair, which threads its way in a kind of intestinal manner through the archive, the storage area of the museum, and provides 2 windows for you to glimpse into the painting racks and sculpture storage. And we loved the idea of Los Angeles offering a kind of starting point of cinema. And originally we had it so that you could literally drive into the lobby, like through the glass wall, same as if you walked, and then the ticket person, which there wouldn't have been one, would just come and take your car and whisk it down, or they would let you go up. Anyway, Eli thought that was a little too sarcastic and made us take it out. But there is such a history to Los Angeles about the car and also sort of the film, and so I think we still captured the kind of filmic quality of the kind of one-way, kind of experience, in a way, linear experience, with a kind of dark, brooding, beginning and this sort of light-filled end, and then a kind of aha moment when you see the archive. About to be completed, which it has been for about 2.5 years, is the Museum of Image and Sound in Rio de Janeiro. Now, this was a competition that we won, international competition, for a museum that is dedicated to Brazilian artists, and in particular artists that are either based in Rio de Janeiro or do work about Rio de Janeiro. So in a way, it was like a museum. It was the Museum of Rio de Janeiro. And it's right on Copacabana Beach. I mean, like, just really a delicious, delicious site. And the great thing about beaches in Brazil, in particular Rio, those of you who've been know this very well, is it's very democratic. Everyone goes there. Fat, skinny, gay, straight, old, young, everybody collects there. Nobody is, has fear. There's no problem. Everybody goes to the same beaches and occupies the same space. It's really quite beautiful, given that Brazil is notorious for its favelas, which occupy the vertical surfaces of the cities, in many of the cities, but especially in Rio de Janeiro, right on the vertical mountainsides. And so our site being right on Copacabana Beach with its very famous Roberto Burle Marx sidewalk, although this pattern is not the Roberto Burle Marx pattern. We just put it in here because it's very, you can read it easily. But gorgeous sidewalk, and so which is an extension of the beach. And we thought, okay, this is the democratic surface of Rio de Janeiro. Why don't we actually make the building out of the sidewalk? So a similar theme that you've seen in some of our projects. Literally bend it up over itself, and at every elbow in the fold, there would be a darkened gallery space, so 4 gallery spaces. So essentially made out of the beach. And so what you get as a building looks something like this. And you can see that favela that I showed just behind here. So in a way, the building is both a horizontal building and a vertical building simultaneously. It has this kind of dual existence. What we did is we convinced the museum to allow visitors to walk up the facade of the building on the outside without a ticket and go up to a park which we created on the roof, and which has lawn and movies and a cafe, and affords a view of all of Copacabana Beach. And that's something that this is the inside. There are a lot of interpretive aspects to the museum. There are also a lot of artifact-based artifacts in the museum. And then the rooftop is open to the public without a ticket, which is really unusual on either of the beaches. Ipanema or Copacabana. You usually have to either own an apartment to get a view or be a guest at a hotel. And so the building, and then it was also, it continues in the theme of the exploration of vision and view from the ICA. Here, we have probably the most famous urban beach ever, in the world, in the universe, ever known to anybody. And in a way, while it's really wonderful because it's fantastic since this view is so identified with Rio, it's also a distraction. And just like in the ICA, we decided to have the building mediate the view and to actually curate the view. So we divided it into sections, and the facade of the building essentially follows the outline of this drawing. And so what we decided is that the upward ascent on the inside of the building would curate focused views from the road to the sky, depending on where you were. And so this is essentially the section of the building looking outside, starting with the first gallery. There are 4 major galleries. And the way that this would happen is by collecting thousands and thousands of tubes that are about a foot long each, and they're all on the facade, and they very slowly change direction together. So they essentially block out your view to any peripheral areas and focus your view in a single spot. This is not a great, it's not a great representation. Actually, it works a lot better than this in reality, which I think I've got. And then so our interns had a lot of fun doing these mock-ups in our studio. We did a dozen of these before we figured out how to make it work and how to color it, and so we decided that we would actually color the inside of each of the tubes blue, which makes a really stunning light on the inside of the buildings. This also operates as sun shading as well for some of the more delicate artifacts, and also because there's media. And so this shows you how it feels on the inside. The building is just a few months shy of opening. As I said, it's been that way for 3 years because of the crisis in Brazil. We've had a lot of problems, but it's back underway. Be on the lookout. And it's very hard to photograph the effect, but because of the lighting differences. But here you're looking towards the west, the east end of Copacabana through a section of the Cobo, we call them the Cobogo cylinders. And this is what they look like on the outside. Rather than have them exposed to the air, they're behind the enclosure of the curtain wall, and they actually swing into the museum so that the glass can be cleaned. And this is the final leg of the walk up to the roof of the building. In a way, you know, it's reminiscent. The walk is a little reminiscent of some of the work at the High Line, a public walk that at times has a sense of invasion and voyeurism. And this is the view of the beach from the very top of the building. This is before they stopped construction. They've gotten a lot more done since then, but the concrete, which wasn't great, but it made a great photograph. And one of the great things about working in Rio is you don't need to insulate your buildings. And so your concrete can be the same on the inside as the outside, which is really wonderful. It's like every architect's dream. So there it is. It's like the concrete is the concrete. So these are images. As of last week, they finally took the construction trailers down so you can see the building finally from the beach. It's really exciting. So it is underway again. And on the back of the building, which is essentially covers all of the service core, it's a really skinny, long building. The back of the building are Carmen Miranda's lips. So her collection is part of the collection of the museum, which is really a lot of fun. This back is made of Brazilian tile, and it's essentially a lenticular. When you see it from one side, it's her lips, and when you see it from the other, it's her eyes, looking out over the beach. A couple of projects, academic projects. I think I've got the Vagelos Center, which just opened up at Columbia University, and it's not a public building, but because it follows in the line of the ICA in the MIS in Rio, this project, it explores a theme that we have been exploring for quite some time, which is the single surface. And I think we've got it out of our system now, but after Rio opened. But it's very useful, and at Columbia, we had to make the new medical education building for the first and second year students. This is a building that everybody would have to go in to take their basic training and work on cadavers and work, in computer simulation of surgery, and I'm just checking the time to see how I'm doing. I have 13 more minutes. And so the medical center for Columbia was a place without a heart. There was really no place for students to gather. There was no green space. There was no communal space. And so our first take of the building was to change the way the program works, which would typically gang all of the shared spaces together on a floor and something that would be called a commons. And instead of doing that, laying it out horizontally, we would take all of those spaces and thread them throughout the building vertically and connect them up with a single surface, a stair, and a set of spaces that let students congregate informally and formally for peer-to-peer learning, which is how people are learning these days more and more, not so much in formal settings. However, the building does have formal spaces. The classrooms are all on the north side of the building. I call this, this is like a reverse, oh gosh, what's the name of the hairdo with the little tail and back? The mullet. It's a reverse mullet, which the mullet was party in the back, business in the front. Well, this is sort of like party in the front, business in the back. And so all the classrooms are in the back, and all of these communal spaces are in the front. And we got Columbia to let us put more than they needed in here. And so we were able to make little neighborhoods, each of which has a collection of an informal stepped space for teaching, an enclosed lecture space, an outdoor terrace, and a kind of collective study space that's not enclosed. And so there are 3 of these neighborhoods that march up the building, and then a central communal space in the middle. And we used low iron glass and a shade system because it does face south, and it faces the beautiful view of Manhattan and the shades could drop down, but you can really see into these spaces, as you can see in E1 Bond's beautiful photographs of the building. And all of the spaces are connected up the side with a stair of terrazzo and wood, and that stair bleeds out to form these womb-like spaces, including an auditorium with views of the George Washington Bridge. This is the kind of common space in the middle that everybody can use. And then when you get to the top floor, here's the open study area. You can see all of Manhattan down in the distance. And I guess one of the things that we were excited that Columbia let us do is essentially foreground student spaces and background offices, which all of the faculty had offices here. I'm sorry, over here, the faculty, but we gave them all windows. But what we did is we made the student spaces be the highlight of the building, because that's what this building and all academic buildings are about, is about students and how they're learning and what they're learning and how they're relating to one another. Here are some of the little collective spaces on the inside. So far, people really quite like the building. Okay, this is the last part of the talk, and so the first part was really about architecture, but the second part is about landscape but landscape that's been architecturalized. Okay, so this is the soft transition, and I'm not sure, it's 7:27. When did you want me to stop? Like soon? Like, no? Okay. Okay, so just when people start falling asleep, I'm gonna yell on the microphone or I'm gonna stop. Anyway, this is what we did for the Liverpool Biennial in Biennale in 2006. We like to say that these trees are misbehaving. They're bad trees. And it's like they've gone to the pub and had too much to drink. Or when you come out of the pub and you wander upon these trees that are all in car turntables and angled at different angles, so they almost hit each other, you perhaps will commit to AA after that. But the point with that is to say that, architects doing landscape is in itself a kind of, it's a kind of perversion in a way, and actually man-made landscape, despite the fact that there has been a huge movement towards naturalistic landscapes, they're still constructed, and so we have to always keep sight of that. And I know you've got a big landscape program here, and I start the discussion with those trees because it leads right into our probably best known project, which I'll speak about a little bit. I'm sure you've been there. The High Line was 1.5 miles of an abandoned rail line that used to deliver food, that the trains used to deliver food to distribution warehouses on the west side of Manhattan. This line went through really some very densely built up areas of Manhattan, from the Village to the Meatpacking District to several parts of Chelsea and all the way around the yards at Penn Station. And there was a huge movement by Giuliani and his supporters to take the line down. It was considered an eyesore. It was considered a block to development of the West Side. And at a certain point, people realized that as the shipping industry went away and the west side of Manhattan was no longer needed for industry, that it would in fact be returned to, it would be domesticated. And a lot of people thought that the High Line would ruin that domestication. Ha, little did they know. Anyway, so here was a note this was at one of the community board meetings, and the High Line should be preserved untouched as a wilderness area. No doubt you will ruin it. So it goes. This is what it looked like before anybody touched it. It had been abandoned in the early 80s, and by 2000, this is what it looked like when Joel Sternfeld was summoned to take photographs. This is before Giuliani got out of office. Sternfeld was summoned by the then very young Friends of the High Line, just formed for the sole purpose of saving the High Line, to photograph the High Line in all seasons. And this is what it looked like, this beautifully made accidental park in the sky. 30 feet above the grid of Manhattan, a kind of bucolic landscape built on nothing. There's no dirt in here. This was just dust and air. These plants thrived in that environment. The plants changed from block to block depending on how the winds went and how the shadows happened. And so when we were one of the finalists to design it, our question is, what will grow here? And so we wanted to take as a starting point what had actually already happened on the line itself. These plants had persevered against all odds and made this lush landscape. And so against all odds, greenery finds its way into our lives through cracks in the concrete and will overtake us if we're not careful. But we thought that was a great analogy and metaphor, just to simply to take what had already happened on the line and have that be the design approach. And so our concept, you'll see in a second, was to make a system of concrete fingers which taper and allow the planting to grow through the ends of the concrete. Also, these planks could be arrayed in a kind of randomized fashion. The entire line could be pixelated with the planks allowing for branching movement or nonlinear movement. So it operates unlike most parks that you know. This is what sections look like. It's very narrow. It goes down to 22 feet wide for a really long stretch, so it was really a daunting challenge to think about how to make an experience which was varied enough to hold people's interest over half a mile at 22 feet wide. The planking system let us make the variations in experience by allowing us to fully cover the line, or to partially cover it, to let it dip down and elevate up, or to even have a portion of the line fully landscaped. So if you know the section between 25th Street and 27th Street, there's a bridge that goes up over a fully landscaped portion called the flyover. But more importantly, we had Pete Udolph. We worked with Jim Corner Field Operations, and also Pete Udolph was the landscape or the horticulturist that we worked with. And we worked very much as a team, and we decided early on, before any demolition happened, that Pete should go and sample every single plant that was on the line and was growing there naturally. And so he did in fact do that, and discovered that, you know, a majority of the plants are native to New York, but there were a lot of plants that were not native and that had grown there from seeds dropped from the passing trains. However, they all were thriving, and so a large majority of the plants that were reintroduced to the High Line as a finished park were ones that we found there and would be essentially considered weeds. But under Pete's masterful artistry, you've seen him since at the Serpentine Pavilion and various other places, he made a plant ecology which the idea is it's self-sustaining and will not require much tending, and also will attract fauna, further bolstering New York's ecosystems. So aside from that, the other thing that excited us about the park, or the High Line, was that it was illicit and seemed dangerous. And the first time I went to a birthday party. I had to crawl through a hole like this over broken bottles and crack vials and syringes to find waiters in tuxedos with silver trays of pre-mixed martinis walking down the line. And so it was that kind of mashup that got Liz Rick and I excited about the social possibilities and programmatic possibilities of the line. And so we knew at that point that we wanted to preserve some of the illicitness of being up there, to being able to pass by people's bedrooms and through commercial spaces and to see into slaughterhouse windows. And that we knew that it didn't want to be a park like any other for specific activities, but that it actually would encourage new forms of loitering. And also, we decided at the very beginning to not allow commercial ventures to take root on the line. Although there are pushcart vendors now, they're all curated. There's a food curator, and they change every season, which seems snobby but good. The materials that we used in remaking the line were all materials we found on the line already. The concrete, the steel, although we did add some glass in, that's about the only material that we brought in new. All of the wood, some of the wood was actually salvaged from the ties that were connecting the lines, and then we used that wood as a kind of guide to making other new wood, such as on these benches, this ipe, and all of the elements of the line come out of. Oh shit! That says I'm done. Come out of the planking system. I'm just going to show 2 more projects, and then I'll be finished. And we salvaged all of the rails. We actually did have to take every little bit off of the line and take all the lead paint off. But we brought the rails back and positioned them exactly where they were, because believe it or not, the rail company, who the city has a 99-year lease from, says they want to be able to bring rails back if they need to. So that just so you know, it could be converted back into a railroad at some point. I think we'll all be dead by then. And so here, these ties that we salvaged some of, but then provided the kind of the model for what to do with the wood. We used the tracks. We made lounge chairs. These lounge chairs could be pushed together. We worked with Hervé Descott from L'Observatoire Lighting and convinced the city of New York that we did not need lights higher than 3 feet off of the line, which was a huge task. They were afraid people would be getting raped up here and various other things. They were also afraid to use glass in a public park, which we have effectively done. There's very little vandalism on the park. And because the design treats the public with a great deal of respect, and we find that the public treats the park with a great deal of respect. It's beautiful in any season. People are up there all year long. And one of the things that Pete and Jim decided to do was to not prune the plants back during the winter. And so they're about to prune them like any day now for spring, or they may have already done it. But essentially this is what it looks like all winter. And we were very keen on also taking advantage of moments within the line. There are these aberrations in the width of the line, such as the time it crosses 10th Avenue, and there were these 10-foot deep girders, and we thought, why don't we do something with that? And so here we put an amphitheater down through the bed of the line and cut windows into the bottom of this new space, and essentially made a new picture window through which you can see New York anew. And it's a grandstand, and at the bottom there's nothing to see except the taillights of cars going up 10th Avenue and the quotidian aspects of city life going by. It has become another popular spot to get married and various other things. These are sort of old. The line has grown in a lot. There are sections where the tree canopy completely covers you now. It's really exciting to see that in less than 10 years, it can take to its artificial, natural location so healthily. Here too, the trees have gone, they're now extending above the walking surface. This is the flyover that's completely planted underneath, and the grating lets light down. And there are several moments where we mimic things that we found on the line when we arrived, such as a series of billboards over the streets in Upper Chelsea in the Gallery District, which had been advertisements / works of art that were bought by the artist Nimrod, I think is his name, and they had these particular frames, and so instead of getting rid of the frames, we illuminated the frames and made a kind of reciprocal moment where the city was framed from the line, but also you were framed from the city. And so there's this kind of actor, agent, passive observer kind of situation that we're very interested in making our public space as well. Oh yes, so here's, all kinds of people have started to inhabit the line. These are the Harlem Steppers, I think they're called. For a while, there was a cabaret singer who went onto her fire escape every night at 9 and serenaded people. They do certain gym classes and yoga. And it was very exciting that the zoning allows for buildings to cross over and engage the line, and one in particular is pretty famous, the Standard Hotel, which came in after the line was already underway. And Andre Balazs, the owner, is rumored to have asked his guests and staff to engage the line in a particular way. And however it came to be, there are many, many photographs of people engaging the line, so much so that we have decided to copy some of what's happened in real life in an opera that we're producing for the line. And I'm going to quickly go past those. And then second to last project, the last one is just a little coda. The shed, which is not part of the High Line, but in a way was inspired by the industrial relic of the line, and also inspired by the train shed, the train yards it sits on top of. The shed is the result of a competition that we engaged in that was run by the City of New York, and the brief asked, what is the future of culture in the City of New York, and what is it missing? And we thought, oh, that's that's easy. Well, I mean, we didn't know, but what we thought is that we would need to make a place that was which was medium agnostic, meaning it could host visual arts, performing arts, media arts, and anything in between or anything imaginable with equal ease, because currently most of our museums are designed for visual arts alone, and most of our performing arts centers don't have capacity to show visual art in the right way. On top of that, we imagined that we needed to make a place that would fund itself in some way, and that could also be changeable to accommodate different forms of media. And so taking inspiration by the gantry crane technology at the port and the rail systems that we were sitting on, we came up with this idea of a kind of shed, a kind of warehouse, which rolls on tracks over a plaza, which would at most of the time be for the public use, and then a fixed building which has 3 floors of column-free space that could be for visual art, performing arts, or culture-related industries. The building can make money through rentals, and that's something that we don't have museums or performing arts centers that acknowledge that from the get-go so much. And the spaces are column-free and they can be outfitted. I'm just going to whiz through these because, anyway. The shed pulls back over the fixed building to make a plaza which can also be inhabited. This shows you the size of the wheels. There are 6 wheels, but the shed rolls in 5 minutes out. And there's a video which explains everything in a second. Those are the wheels on site. This is a hard image to comprehend, but those are the 2 sides of the shed under construction in Italy. And if you can see, there's a person in the middle of that shed lying down. The Italians really do know how to put stuff together. I have to say, they did a fantastic job. This is the shed underway in New York. This was about a month and a half ago. Here's one of the column-free spaces in the fixed building, and here's the shed happening quietly. People don't even realize it, in the Hudson Yards, a 150-foot cube that rolls and is fully conditioned, fully darkenable, can turn into a theater at the drop of a hat. And I'm going to show you the video which proves it. Here it goes. And then there's just a few more slides, and then I'll take some questions. And so it's up there at Hudson Yards, and Hudson Yards is a phenomenal project in many ways. And it's attached to, I forgot to mention this, it's attached to condo building, which we're also designing. And they share organs. They share mechanical systems and different organs that allow each to exist. So they're symbiotic. The steel is in literally a building with all of its services intact and systems intact. The systems sit in the ceiling of the shed. The delivery of freight can happen via giant elevator, or trucks can drive right onto the plaza and drive right into the building. There are giant glass doors which go up and excuse me, allow the shed to become part of the public space. A system of winches and hoists which allow it to operate in a theatrical manner. They can drive, trucks can drive right into the fixed building. When these two spaces are merged up, it's 32,000 square feet of contiguous column-free space, which is quite large. And wait for it. Here it goes. Art! Here is the tech grid that comes down. It can form essentially a lowered ceiling if you ever need that, but more excitingly and importantly, it allows you to rig this 130-foot cube to do various things. It can be darkened down and acoustically dampened. You can have just a chunk of the grid fall down and do theater in the round. Several thousand people can be seated for a show here. Imagine how many heels would be broken in this fashion show. We would definitely see a lawsuit from that. And this goes on, but I mean, it gives you a sense of this. And shockingly enough, this project is actually being made, as you saw in those photographs, and very visible from the High Line. If you go up there, you can check it out. And we're going to be giving it its first push in a couple of months. And the eastern edge is equipped also for projection and sound. I don't know how much longer this goes on. Jesus Christ. Okay. Well, you get the idea. I'm going to end on a very interesting project. It's just going to take a few minutes. And I think the thing that's really fascinating is simply that an American architecture firm led by a gay guy, I mean, I don't lead the firm, but I lead this project, is doing the site on Red Square next door to the Kremlin. In fact, if you see my little arrow, well, I can show you where Putin's landing. Putin's helicopter landing pad is right here. We've seen it go from here. So literally, you know, anyway, you got the idea. So it is under construction and set to open in September, which is really shocking. In this design, it was an international competition that we won, and our idea was to bring Russian landscapes, kind of the quintessential, iconic Russian landscapes, to the center of Moscow, including its birch forest landscape, which covers essentially 70% of Russia, some really ridiculous amount, but it's quite beautiful. And so we call our project Wild Urbanism, where 4 of Russia's most important ecologies migrate to the center of Moscow. You can see that it's essentially operating as Moscow's Central Park. It's not as big as Central Park, but it's certainly as meaningful to the city as Central Park is to New York. Here are the different ecologies that we sampled. We brought them into the site. We arrayed them in respect to where they exist, the site slopes, in respect to where they exist in nature, height-wise, from tundra to steppe to forest to wetland. And we overlap them in key moments, and every one of those nodes is a piece of building program. There's a museum, there's a kind of natural history center, there's a restaurant, and there's a market hall. And the other thing that we're trying to do, and then there's also a quite large shed, glass shed that covers a hill that in turn is covering a new Philharmonic Hall, which we did not design. But one of the things we were trying to do was counteract Russia's super cold winters by thinking of these nodal intersection moments as places where the climate would be augmented ever so slightly to make being in these places comfortable year-round. And we do that passively through the capturing of sunlight, and actively through the storage of energy from the sun and other sources that is brought back in the form of heat and sometimes cooling. We actually have an ice cave. And this is what it looks like, St. Basil's Cathedral, as actually the front door of the park. And then you can see the grid shell over on the right covering the Philharmonic Hall, a bridge which goes out over the roadway to form a new sentinel and lookout. We developed a paving system, which is the next in a generation of the Highline paving system, a kind of pixelation, which covers the entire park. And we call it a pathless park, as opposed to other parks in Moscow, which are edged and curbed and have only one way of moving about them. Here, the paving covers the entire park in varying degrees of paved and not paved. So that people that occupy or go to the park can flow in sort of unscripted ways. And here are different scenes. There's a sledding hill. There's a restaurant that's built into the fold of the park. We kind of didn't want to make buildings on the park, so all the architecture is really literally made with the park, made of the park itself. We do have a space that's frozen all year round. It's got a vodka bar, of course. And then there's a Philharmonic Hall. This is our competition entry. It's developed quite a bit since then. There is, in fact, a grandstand covered partially by this grid shell. And this is how the grid shell is ending up. It's wood. It's a wood shell with a window. And in the window, there is a framed view back to Moscow. So while you enter into this sort of naturalistic landscape and you lose yourself and lose the sounds of Moscow, when you climb up this hill, you actually ascend into a warm pocket of air that when you get to the very top and you look back, there's a framed view of the city. So something that is familiar to you by now in some of our other projects. And shockingly enough, this is a year ago. It's far more developed. It is actually being made. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much. And I guess I'll take any questions if you have them. I did that good a job? Oh, okay. Yes. Yes?
I really studied that few building that you didn't show that really was imaginative, innovative.
Which one are you talking about? Oh, the shed. Yeah. Thank you.
Imaginative, creative building I've ever seen in my life. It's just really wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm being sort of I'm a planner from this school originally, and it always strikes me, and I know the profession knows this is a problem for decades, and that is that kind of brilliance really is accessible to such a small number of people, and the planet now is something that we're all concerned with. And it's an operational problem I'm thinking about all the time, and that is, how do you make that kind of brilliance globally available? I mean, what do we need to do to take that kind of thinking and make it accessible on a planet basis? Because we need planetary solutions to so many problems.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if I had to be, can everybody hear me? Can I just talk? Yeah, because I'm from Texas. I'm really loud. Yeah, I think we're all, especially since the election, I think we're all doubling down on our thinking about what we should be doing in the world. I mean, this is sustainability, but it's also like how to give everybody access to these experiences. And so I guess part of the point of my talk is to say, we have these sort of elite jobs, and it's true, we do. And if I had to be critical of a lot of practices working at the upper fringes of the profession, it's that what we need to be doing with those kind of great opportunities is trying to engage the populace as much as possible. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do. However, I would say that there is so much great design happening around the world. There's a lot of energy being spent in Africa and India and in China. I mean, China is a whole different story, but for sure in some less developed places that I think is quite wonderful. But I mean, I think we're sort of stuck a little bit with the problem of our world. It's a globalized world. Some people are winners and some people are not. And how do we actually overcome that problem? Winners. I sound very like I'm Trump. Okay, sorry. Some people are just advantaged by the construct of the system, and others are not. So, short of revolution, how do we work it? And I'm asking the question too, and I'm not exactly sure. But what we try to do with our projects is make them as open to people as we can. Question?
Can I just shout? So thanks for a great lecture. You mentioned with the ICA in Boston notions of iconicity.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be incredibly vague and broad, but I wonder if you could just talk about that for a minute. How you guys view iconicity? Do you try to subdue it most of the time, or that's good.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, we're not formalists. We don't have, I mean, you could see some thread of some formal investigation with the single surface, but that was always at the service of experience. And I think that we try to construct experiences more than images, and that comes from, I think, a start in the theater and in the performing arts, which is always about a fixed point of view and an experience that you witness through time. And so that's been something that we've been, that's propelled the work. On the other hand, we're making things that exist in the world. They're objects. They should be beautiful. And they should be expressive, certainly of what they're doing, if not more. And they should be innovative and challenging. And so I don't think we don't design objects to be icons for icon's sake. And our practice is very different than others that have existed or continue to exist with a formal exploration that is much the same from project to project. We try to take each of our projects individually and look at what the solution should be for them. And sometimes there is image. I mean, it's hard. It will be hard to not call the shed a new icon for the city because it is kind of what it is, and the scale was part of the ambition of the project. On the other hand, that wasn't its motivation to begin with. So I'm answering your slightly vague question with an equally vague answer. But I mean, I think it's a worthwhile discussion. Sort of formalism versus pragmatism versus experience. These are issues that we should all be wondering about. And then, of course, equity. That's such a big issue. Anyway, back there.
Yeah. So you mentioned you guys have been exploring a culture of visuality.
Yes.
Since your early work. How do you think that recent advances in kind of ubiquitous technology and social media, this kind of culture of display and broadcasting, has affected that in an architectural sense, if at all?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. You're right. There is, it used to be we were afraid of being photographed and, like invasion of privacy, and now we're afraid of not being photographed, right? Like, oh gosh, no one's looking at my pictures, and no one's looking at my Instagram. So in a way, it's always, we're always making more fodder to play with, and clearly vision is the thing that we used the most and it has the most resonance, given the preponderance of apps that are visual, photographic, and video in nature. And even though there is that preponderance of that medium, I don't think it's going to diminish what we can do with vision. What did I see recently that was old-fashioned and it still worked? I think it's reinforcing how important vision is to our culture and how much we depend on it to construct our everyday lives. I do think in terms of social media, I sense that there is already and will be a fairly substantial backlash given fake news and other things that social media has been part of an actor in promoting. And I think that's fantastic. The subscriptions to New York Times haven't been higher in like years and years and years. And these are journalists that are paid to do the job they do. And I think about that in terms of vision too. That photography is really a profession, and journalism, photography, and various other things. But anyway, I guess we all have to just buckle our seatbelts because we don't really know what's going to happen, but we know it's going to be kind of crazy for a little bit. I don't know what happened today in the news. Anyway, next question. I've only gotten 10 CNN alerts. Yes.
What was that site of the park in Moscow? I'm trying to remember.
Okay, it was the Hotel Rosia. Okay. It was the world's largest hotel, 3,000 rooms. But before that, it was one of the Seven Sisters. It was planned to be one of the Seven Sisters, so one of Moscow's. It would have been the 8th of those tiered tall buildings that you see in Moscow, the kind of iconic 20th century structures of Moscow. It was intended to go there, and they never finished it.
And why did they tear? The Rosia Hotel wasn't that old, so why did they?
Was built in the 60s, I think, and they tore it down because after it became a capitalist country, that was a state-owned hotel. It was a beast, and they realized that land was so precious that the state should sell it. So originally they were going to put a giant commercial district there, designed by any number of people, but the design I remember was by Norman Foster. And the city architect, this is actually a really good story, while Zaryadye it's not a federal project, it's a city project. And it was brought about by the city architect, Sergei Kuznetsov, who realized that site should be given back to the city. And he held a competition to make it a park. And actually, that was quite wonderful, instead of a commercial center. Other questions? Thank you all.